Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
That was a barn burner of a rehearsal, I think.
Indeed it was, yes. Yeah. We're talking about band practice.
Yeah, and we had band practice tonight with a couple of people who were going to join us on stage for Bratfest in Madison. So if you guys aren't familiar with Bratfest, which you're probably not unless you're in the Midwest, Bratfest is the largest free music festival in the world. So there's like 200 bands. And like huge bands too, like it's me, Charlie Daniels and Bret Michaels, and like even Aaron Lewis from Stained, who I guess does a country thing now. I did love that So Far Away song in 2003.
Oh.
I put it on a mixtape for a girl.
Mixtape.
No, yeah, well, no, it was a mix CD. It was a mix CD for a girl a long time ago. But Bratfest is super fun, and it's all for charity. It's all like all the brats are donated, and it's
people get paid to grill the brats and stuff, and then the money goes toward the local charities here in Madison, which
and
is
like
really
the
nice.
local newscasters grill brats and stuff. And the thing is, being Madison, they also I am not a meat eater myself, so they have plenty of veggie brats, so you can have an entire vegan meal. At Bratfest, and it's one of the few places that you can have a vegan meal at.
Yeah, it's great.
So it's cool. Like it's a festival where there's free live music, great beer, and vegan meals.
Yeah.
So and it all goes to charity. So I'm happy to support it every year.
Yes, and Sunspot, our band will be playing on Sunday the 24th
At 4 p.m.
Yeah.
on the Ho Chunk main stage.
Yeah, so if you happen to be in Madison, drop on by. It's a free show.
And so we just finished a rehearsal for that, and it was really exciting. And we're bringing in some people to augment our sound on stage.
Yeah,
so that was a fun thing too. Anyway, we're just all juiced up from rehearsal. And but we really wanted to talk about Deborah Moffitt, who we brought on this week, and I interviewed this weekend. Her story, a deadly haunting.
Yeah, and a terrifying story.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredible story, and Deborah's got a lot to say, and she's a sweet woman.
And what her family went through, I mean, unimaginable.
Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing. And so, like, the connections to, if you guys have ever seen an Amityville Horror or read the book Amityville Horror, it's kind of about that, like, where these crazy things happen in a haunted house, and then it also brings up a little paranormal activity to me too, because this follows them from house to house. It's about a demon that follows their family, not just. And it's like you're thinking like a haunted house. Once I leave the haunted house, I'm fine. Well, what if you left the haunted house and the next place you went to, it got even worse?
Yeah, see, because that's what I was saying. Is some of the things that she describes. I mean, the second I saw that, I would be so out of that place. I wouldn't go near it.
And that's what the Paranormal Activity, like the first Paranormal Activity. Yeah. I haven't seen the sequels. The first one's great. The rest of them, okay.
Oh,
but the first one is
you're talking. I'm sorry. When you said the Paranormal Activity, I thought you just were using
in general.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the movie Paranormal Activity.
Okay, I haven't seen
footage movie, and it's about a demon that follows a girl.
I see. So there is no escape.
I am the demon that has followed some girls in my life. And then it also brings in past lives. And you'll hear that in the interview. And that makes me think about Dead Again. Which Kenneth Branagh, I'm a massive Kenneth Branagh fan.
Me too.
I think he went off the reservation when he left Emma Thompson. Myself, because Helena Bonham Carter is a dish, no question. But she's no Emma Thompson. Just saying. And the early run he had with Henry V and when he was married to Emma Thompson and all this stuff. And Dead Again is a brilliant movie. Emma Thompson, Kenneth Branagh, Derek Jacobi, Robin Williams in his best uncredited performance.
Oh.
And a lot of it has to do with the sins of the past life.
I see.
Revisiting the present.
Okay.
And so that's a really good past life movie that kind of this story makes me think of.
Interesting.
And it has all these elements, even a little bit element of Poltergeist. I think the original. They're making a remake of Poltergeist now. Right? They remake.
I saw the trailer for that.
Yeah, and Sam Rockwell's playing the dad. Sam Rockwell, he's the red shirt in Galaxy Quest. He's Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Moon. You ever seen Moon? The movie directed by David Bowie's son.
No.
Like David Bowie's first kid, not a kid with a man, but a kid with his English wife. Anyway, watch Moon.
Okay.
It's go home on Netflix
Right now.
Wendy, we should
leave.
stop.
Bye,
talking.
guys.
So stop talking. Go home on Netflix.
I'm heading out the
and
door.
watch Moon.
I'm leaving.
Okay, Wendy's out the door, and I'm gonna go talk to Deborah Moffitt. Here we go. We are with Deborah Moffitt, the experiencer behind the book A Deadly Haunting, a true story as told to Joy Albrecht. Am I saying that name correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay. And how you doing today, Deborah?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us on See You on the Other Side today. Just for a quick introduction to our audience, where you at right now?
And Rancho Cucamonga, California.
Okay. How's the weather in California today?
It's a little overcast today.
Okay. Well, but you guys don't have winter, so I don't feel too bad for you. I'm talking to you from Minneapolis, which is a lovely city and great weather today, but we have to live through winter in order to get there.
Well, I'm from New York originally, so I know snow.
Okay. Oh, so you understand the winter. Good.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, just to talk a little bit about A Deadly Haunting, can you give us a little bit of the time frame that these things happen to you?
I can tell you when I exactly started experiencing this was in 1987. Supposedly, and I can only tell you what I was told, it started back in 1984. And the reason we think that is because some of the researchers that came to the house tried to speculate what brought this about. And back in 1984, my mother-in-law had hired a housekeeper from Guatemala who supposedly practiced Santeria. And she opened some type of door and allowed this to come through. So for me, it started about 1987. That's when I first started experiencing these things. And it lasted till the end of 92.
And you know what I think after, reading A Deadly Haunting and reading the chapter on Juanita, the woman who was taking care of your grandmother-in-law, Dominica, it's funny, the book almost even starts with immigration politics because she wouldn't, so to people who are listening, one of the reasons that this woman performed the ritual is because she wanted to keep her job taking care of Deborah's grandmother-in-law, Dominica, and if Dominica passed away, then she'd no longer have to have a job and return to Guatemala.
Correct.
And so I just, I thought that was funny. It's like, oh, well, if we had a little bit easier immigration policy, then maybe this whole thing wouldn't have happened in the first place. So to catch up, so that happened in 1984, and then you went to the picture because you got married to Bill.
Right.
Bill Jr., who was, he was at the center of the family that all these things happened to. How did you meet Bill? Like, did you know that you were going to get caught in a maelstrom of paranormal activity?
I really didn't. I met Bill through we started exchanging letters, and that's how we met, actually exchanging letters. We were, he wanted something taped on the East Coast, and I wanted something taped on the West Coast, and so we exchanged letters and started exchanging tapes, and it grew from that.
Oh, that's fun. So you guys were like back in the day before internet and DVDs and everything like that. So what were you guys recording for each other?
He actually loved professional wrestling.
Okay.
So I was recording a wrestling show he couldn't get back in the West, and we was out in the East, an Eastern wrestling show.
And that's funny because that kind of meeting will never happen again. So that kind of thing where it's like, yeah, I'll videotape this for you and you videotape this for me and we trade some shows and stuff. And
I remember I used to do that with Doctor Who episodes because people.
Oh, I love Doctor Who.
Yeah, because people in different cities, their PBS stations would have different things taped, and you couldn't get the stuff because you couldn't even buy the videotapes from England at the time.
Right. Back then you couldn't.
So, no, that's a cute story of how you guys met. And then you came out to California.
Mm-hmm. And once I saw Bill, I knew we were never going to be apart until the day he died. We weren't. We were together every single day.
I mean, through good times and bad, and it sounds like some scary times.
Yeah, some very scary times.
And let's talk about that. So, I mean, that's what the story of Deadly Haunting is based on. This how quickly into your marriage and getting together did weird things start happening in the house that you lived at?
Okay, now let me explain how that situation was.
Okay.
This was down on Archibald Avenue in Rancho Cucamonga, and there were 3 houses right in a row on the corner. And my mother-in-law and father-in-law owned the one in the middle. The one to the right, was owned when she was alive by my mother's mother. Then the one on the left of the house was owned by my husband. He inherited it from his aunt when she died. Now, my husband had a heart condition, so he was living with his parents. He felt more comfortable with his parents because of his heart condition. So when we got married, I moved in with them. We stayed there in the middle house because I just loved his mother so much. So I was very comfortable there. The paranormal events actually started in my husband's house that we were renting out.
And you rented out to a guy named Danny, right?
Right. And when we first rented it out, at the beginning, no problem. We rented it out with the rules that my husband had a large sports collection. He collected sports objects and cards and all kinds of things. We kept one of the rooms in that house to store all my husband's sports memorabilia. So Danny he rented out a bedroom, but he had use of the rest of the house. The rules was he just couldn't touch the one room. And he seemed like a very nice young man. We'd go up periodically to check on the things in the room. We went up one afternoon, and we opened the door because the door was kept locked. Mm-hmm. We went in the room, and all the bobbleheads, he had baseball bobbleheads that were on the wall, were taken off the wall and put into a large triangle on the floor. Now, that was the very first paranormal event that I witnessed. But at the time, I didn't think it was a paranormal event. We both thought that, Danny probably had gotten into the room and just did this as a joke or something. Because you don't think something that you can't see got into the room and did this. So we automatically thought it was the tenant. We confronted him about it. He said, I've never been in that room. I don't even touch the door. I just don't touch it. Things started to progress from there with the paranormal.
Well, that triangle formulation, right? So that triangle with like an S-shaped tail. Now, that would show up a lot of places over the next few years because later on you learned that was the symbol of Mr. Entity, the name that you called the demon that lived in your house.
Mm-hmm. The next thing that started happening, are you familiar with the term apports?
Yes.
Okay. Then we started getting apports in the middle house where we were all living. My mother-in-law was very religious. And next to her bed, she had a chest. And on the chest, she was Catholic. She had saints and she had all kinds of religious statues. Mm-hmm. And she would pray there every night before she went to bed. Well, she woke up one morning and there was a pair of men's briefs over a statue of Jesus.
And there were nobody's briefs that were in the house, right? Like nobody's like, hey, what are my hands doing on there?
Yeah, because, so my mother thought, what's going on? She thought one of us had done it, but we didn't, none of us knew what was going on. And it progressed from there. We got some of his, and we found out later it was belonged to the tenant because we got some of his receipts, we got letters, we had his jewelry. And it got to the point where it was actually bringing things that were valuable, like a beautiful watch. So we couldn't go to the tenant and say, we have your things up at our house.
Right.
They're coming up there. Nobody's bringing them. Because he would think, think we were taking his things. So we would try to take them back to the house. Well, we would take them back to the house, and they would come right back again.
Well, and when you read the story too, I think it's interesting that you go into different situations, and I think one of them, you're visiting some of your in-laws' friends, and when you guys get back, like there's like a wallet, like Carl's wallet came with you back to the house.
That was later on. That was after we moved.
Okay.
That was when we moved. The next thing that happened was we went down to the house a little more often, thinking we better keep an eye on the things down in the room. And there started to be symbols over all the light switches. Where you click the lights on and off, there were symbols. It looked like in crayon. And there were all kinds of different symbols. Some were the triangle again. There were crosses upside down. There were pentagrams. There were wiggly lines. A lot of the symbols we didn't even recognize. Didn't know what they were. We asked the gentleman, why are you writing on the wall? He again said, I'm not doing anything. I don't know what's going on. And that week, he moved out. I mean, he gave us 1 day notice and he was gone. But he never said anything was happening in the house. He never said anything was bothering him. He just, I have nothing to do with this, and he was gone.
And so he just got up and took off. And
right.
So that was so that was taking place in your husband's house
rental,
that was given
and
to him
that was in 1987. That was when it first started.
So you have that house that your husband inherited. You have the house that you guys are living in, which is your in-laws' house. And then you also have Domenica's house, right?
Right. Now, Domenica's house, one of the things that had happened, how we found out that this lady, we think, practiced Santeria. When my mother-in-law died, we went up, my mother-in-law, I wasn't there at the time, my mother-in-law and Bill went up to clean the house. And when they went in the house, they found in the corners broken rosary beads, blood, different symbols on the floor, bird feathers. So something had been going on there. They cleaned the house and decided to rent it out. They rented it out to a gentleman named Monty. Monty was a very nice gentleman. He never complained, but my husband told me he did ask a few very strange questions. He wanted to know if somebody died in the house. And my husband was afraid of the paranormal. When this first started, I mean, he didn't even want to hear about it.
Sure.
The gentleman said that he felt someone was trying to contact him in the house, and he had been using a Ouija board. Well, my husband didn't want to know anything about it. So that's as far as that went.
Okay.
Monty never complained, but just we knew maybe something was going on in the house.
So Monty was okay with everything. Danny didn't complain either, but you guys were seeing things taking place inside that house.
Right. And I don't know what happened with Danny. I mean, he must have saw something to leave within like a day, not even give us notice. So I know that he was gone.
And what were you seeing in the house you were living in?
At the time, all we had gotten at that time were reports. Nothing else had happened at that time.
The weird stuff that was showing up from Danny's house inside your mother-in-law's
right.
shrine.
Right. So we went down. I remember my husband and I went down to the house to clean it, to get it ready for a new tenant. He went into the room to check on his sports, and I was in the living room. And in the living room, there is up very high. You have to get on a ladder. There's a shelf that runs the whole length of the living room, and you'd have to get on that ladder to do anything on the shelf. And I remember looking at the shelf because there was a lot of knickknacks and thinking, oh, these needed to be dusted. And I remember looking till my husband came in the room. I looked at him and I looked back at the shelf, and every single item on the shelf was turned backwards. And this was in like a blink of an eye. Everything was backwards. And I remember telling my husband, and he of course said, "You're imagining things. They were like that when you first came in. You just didn't notice." But they weren't.
Well, did anybody freak out at this time? I'm thinking if this kind of stuff happened to me, I would freak out. I'd be like, that's it. We're out of here.
Yeah. Well, my mother-in-law was getting very frightened. Although you have to realize at this point, nothing threatening had happened.
Okay.
It was all very calm. Nothing bad was happening. There was not even a bad feeling in the house. You walked in the house, it didn't feel like something evil was there. And it was just the point. The truth is that when this first started happening, it was absolutely amazing because we would come into that. Now, this is when we were still cleaning the house. We would go into that house, and the next time we came in, a lamp from like one of the bedrooms was sitting in the middle of the living room. And my husband said, "Oh, someone must have gotten into the house and moved it." Because we were still thinking, we weren't thinking paranormal other than the porch. We knew something was going on there. But my husband always wanted to attribute everything to a real person because it made him feel safer.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, but it wasn't. I said, "No, Bill, something's going on." So I would start asking. I would say, "If there's something in this house, move something." No, it would never do it right in front of you. It wouldn't move something in front of you. You would turn your back, or you'd go in the other room for a second, and you'd come back and something would be moved. I remember I asked that. We went into the kitchen to look around. When I came back, I think it was the dining room table was in the middle of the living room.
And is this when, in the book, it's always messages left in the bathroom mirror with soap. Did messages appear during this time in any of these collection of homes that your family owned?
The 3 homes down there, no. The only writing we had down there were the symbols over the light fixtures. There was no writing. There was no actual communication. But we thought, my husband started to think his uncle had died in the house. So he started thinking, well, maybe it's my uncle trying to communicate with us. Because it became like a game, a deadly game at the time, which I didn't realize. But it was like a game because you would ask it to do things, and this unseen presence would do them. And it was amazing.
And then, so it didn't feel dangerous or anything like that at the time. At the time, it was like, wasn't. Oh, this is, look at how neat this is. It's the spirit of my uncle, and he's moving stuff around.
Yeah, it was non-threatening. Then a few things started moving at the house we were living in. Nothing bad, again, but things like to turn backwards. It would like to turn pictures backwards, turn everything backwards. Little things start happening. Then everything kind of quieted down. Everything kind of quieted down. So we decided, well, we'll rent out the house again. So it was all cleaned. We rented it out. We rented it out to a gentleman, an older gentleman, and a younger woman. And I think his name was Tom. Her name was Michelle. Yeah, I know Michelle.
Yeah, in the book, no, it was Tom and Michelle, and it seemed like Tom wasn't very nice to his girlfriend, right?
When they first moved in, everything was fine. He was quiet. He was a quiet person. She was more gregarious. But they kept to themselves. I would see her periodically out in the front yard. We would talk and communicate. And I noticed as the days went on, Michelle became a little stranger, a little more reserved, not as talkative. And then one day I came out and she was almost hiding in the bushes. And you could see by looking at her, she had been beaten up. She had a black eye and swollen lip. And I asked her, what's going on, Michelle? And she told me that since they had moved in the house, Tom had changed. She said he had gotten very mean. And I said, you can't live with someone that's hurting you.
Right.
Would you like me to take you to a shelter or something? She said, no, it's okay. I can take care of myself. Well, I didn't see her for like a week. And I saw her all the time. Sometimes we didn't talk, but I always saw her. So I saw Tom like a week later, and I asked him, well, where's Michelle? And he said, Michelle left me. And he was not friendly. So, that's where the conversation ended. Like a week after that, he moved out. He gave us a day notice that I'm leaving. I'll be gone tomorrow. And he was gone. We went up to check the house out to see what it needed to be cleaned and taken care of, to re-rent it out. And the house was spotless. I mean, it was bleached. It was clean as could be.
It's clean. But then later on, you find out that Michelle was found dead, right?
Right. About 2 or 3 weeks later, we had put the ad in the paper to re-rent it. My husband and I were in the front yard. He went in. I saw a man knocking at the door next door, and I went over and said, no one's there. He said, well, where's Tom? I said, well, I don't know. He left. He said, well, did you hear what happened to Michelle? I said, no. He said, they found Michelle's body wrapped in a rug in the landfill. And then he left. I mean, I couldn't talk to him, ask him more questions about it. He just said, I have to go, and he left. Well, I went back and told my husband and his family, do you think this really happened? Because I had heard nothing about it.
Sure.
Now, my husband was a fanatic about the news. He read like 6 papers a day, knew every news show. He said, I've never heard anything about it. But we don't even know where this gentleman said where the landfill was, what city it was in, or what it was. So I don't know.
So you guys didn't call the police or anything like that?
No, I wanted to, I said to my husband, do you think we should, he said, what are you going to tell them? That they lived here and you don't know anything. But the only thing was, the man said she was wrapped in a rug, and one of the big throw rugs was missing. See, that's what really worried me. And I don't know if Michelle was dead or if she wasn't dead. I really don't know. But I felt guilty because I wanted to do something, but what could I do?
Right. You didn't have any proof or anything like that. All you had was a missing rug.
Right. So now we decided after the gentleman told us that, not to rent the house out. We weren't going to rent it out anymore. One other reason was we had decided to move to a larger house. The 4 of us were going to stay together, and we decided to move to a bigger house so we could all live together. So we were going to sell all 3 houses.
And then you guys did that, and you were starting a family, and how far away did you move?
We only moved up the hill, like 6-7 miles up the hill. Now, before we left, because we were moving so close, we took a long time to move. We would move a little. We were moving by ourselves. So we were still there, even though we were in the process of moving. We had put the property on the market. The last day that we were on the property, it was just my mother-in-law and myself. Now, up until this point, there had never been any actions other than what might have happened with Michelle.
Sure.
That were hostile. It was still just like nothing bad.
Right.
Well, the last day we were there, my mother-in-law and I were in the bedroom packing the last box, and we heard a loud bang from the kitchen, like almost an explosion. The 2 of us ran to the kitchen, and all the cupboards in the kitchen had been ripped off the walls. Just literally ripped off the walls, and pieces were on the floor. While we were in the kitchen, in the bedroom, we heard glass exploding. We went back to the bedroom, and all the glass in the bedrooms had been blown out. So I remember I grabbed one little box, and my mother and I left. And at that point, the hostility started to show. It was like he was mad that we were leaving.
Well, how long into living in the new house did you start receiving messages and weird things start happening?
Well, we lived at the house about 3 weeks, and everything was wonderful. We thought we left it behind. We're fine. It's gone. Then the very first thing that happened was a picture was turned backwards. Now, we all at that time, we all thought, oh, maybe somebody just inadvertently moved it.
Right.
But we all knew, no, because this was what it liked to do, turn things backwards. And then at first, it just started turning the things backwards again and moving things around. Then my mother-in-law and father-in-law, it's a big, very big house. And they had the suite upstairs, and it's a bedroom with a bathroom, and then there's a big, real large sitting room that the previous owner had used for a playroom. My mother-in-law was upstairs, and she called me like in a panic. And I remember I ran upstairs, and she said, you have to see this. She pulled me into her bathroom, and on the mirror was, talk to me. And it was written in soap. And I remember we looked at each other, and the first thing automatically, something like that, we thought, well, one of us must have wrote this. Who was playing a joke? Yeah, but my husband was downstairs. I had a child, and when we first moved up there, Jamie was born. So my husband came up the steps, brought Jamie with him, and my father-in-law came up. So we were all there together, and we were all debating who did this, and we were all denying it. We didn't touch it. And I said, well, let's try this. So we erased it. I cleaned the mirror, and we left. We went into the other room. And I said, and my father-in-law asked a question. I can't remember what he asked, but he asked some question. We waited a little while. We went back in. I remember peeking in to see if any new writing was on the mirror. And it was written, there was writing on the mirror again. So
how often would writing then appear on the mirror? Now,
it started off not too often. Like, it was at least once a day. It would communicate. But it got to the point when it got really violent. It would, at this point, it was still not as violent. After what the things it did down at the other house, it still wanted to communicate, but then it started destroying the house. It took the symbol, the triangle with the tail, and it carved it into walls. It cut it out of our carpets. It destroyed the house. Every day was a process of patching and painting and trying to keep the house together. At first it tried to pretend that it was my mother-in-law's dead sister. It would call her a name, which was Nini, that no one else knew that her sister had called her when she was a little girl. And it tried to tell us to stay out of the attic. It didn't want us to go in the attic.
Okay.
It said, don't go in the attic. There's a bad wire there. There'll be a fire. Stay out of the attic. There's danger. So my mother-in-law wanted to believe it was her sister. So when we finally said, no, Ma, it's not your sister, when the entity finally realized we weren't going to fall for that, then it started to get more violent.
And like what kind of things would it say? I mean, it would say things like idiots, fools, it would call you guys names.
It wanted us to get a Ouija board. It told us to talk to it on the board. And I said, well, we're not getting a Ouija board. We're not talking to this on the board. Finally, I remember my father-in-law asked what its name was, what its name, and it said its name was Prince.
And not like Prince, the musician.
No.
Right.
It just put down Prince, Prince. So it wanted us to call him Prince.
Now, you called it Mr. Entity. That's what you called it. But when you guys were talking about it amongst each other, and first of all, who at this point was freaked? Like you said, your husband was very afraid of the paranormal. Was he like, we gotta call a priest? Because I know that your mother-in-law was very Catholic.
My mother-in-law at the beginning, especially when we were even at the other place, she was afraid people would think we were crazy with all these things because they were so foreign to her and to all of us, really. And at that time, it wasn't like now. This was like 25 years ago. If you started, there was no place to look for help like there is on the internet or all these people that now try to help people that are being bothered by the paranormal. There was nothing. So the first place, she didn't want anyone to know. So at this point is when we really started to get isolated because she wouldn't allow us to tell anyone what was going on. And Mr. Entity wanted us isolated. He didn't want us to have friends or to have anybody to the house. He wanted us isolated because his whole goal was to control us.
And your child was still very young, still too young to have like friends over or anything like that.
A little baby, yeah. And we never let Jamie out of our sight. Jamie was with one of us 24 hours a day. He was never alone because I wasn't going to leave my child alone in something going on like this.
And so when did you start calling paranormal investigators to come check it out?
I remember the first thing we called was a priest. My mother-in-law called a priest. Now, she hadn't been affiliated with a church for a long time. She was Catholic. She was a good Catholic, but she didn't attend church. So she contacted a priest in Guasti, an older gentleman, and she didn't even tell him what was going on. She asked him to come up to the house to bless the house because she hoped by even blessing the house it would stop what was going on.
Sure.
Well, the priest came. he was an older gentleman, a little old man. He came through the front door into the foyer. He stood there, and he just looked at my mother-in-law and myself. We were both standing there, and he took out his holy water and he made the sign of the cross, and he said, "This house is blessed. I have to go." And I remember my mother-in-law looked panicked. She said, "Don't you have to go to every room and go through the house and bless every room?" And he said, no, this is good. Your house is blessed now. I have to leave. Well, she started crying because she had such high hopes that he was going to help us.
Right.
That she got very, emotional. And then she tried to explain to him what was going on, that we needed help. And I remember he turned to me and made like a crazy sign on his ear and said, "When ladies get this old, they get crazy. I have to go." And he just left the house and got into his car and drove away.
So that wasn't. So your first experience with someone here to help you in your house didn't really have the effect that you wanted it to.
No, it was a catastrophe.
But then, when you're going through the book, you guys bring in Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Oh, we had people from all over the United States. We had a lady from Louisiana who was into voodoo. We had magicians. We had practitioners of all different types of. We had evil people that did the Santeria like she did, hoping that would help it. We had researchers. We had people from.
I know you contacted Lloyd Auerbach. I mean, Lloyd Auerbach's been a guest on our show.
Oh yeah, a real gentleman, a very nice man.
Mm-hmm.
He sent Chris Chacon out. Now during this time, it had gotten so bad, it had destroyed my mother and father-in-law's bed upstairs. It had just ripped it to pieces. So they didn't even have a place to sleep. So it got she was so frightened. We all moved in together into the master bedroom downstairs. So now in the master bedroom downstairs is my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my child, my husband, and myself. It's a very large room. It has a sitting room in it. So we each had our own little separate area, but we were all together in the bedroom. And that was the only place she felt even a little safe. When the entity realized that that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were no longer going to be upstairs,
mm-hmm.
it started writing on the bathroom mirror in the guest bathroom downstairs. It didn't write upstairs anymore because no one was up there to see it, but it took over the upstairs. You could start to walk up the stairs and you could feel its presence, like halfway up the stairs, you could feel its presence. It controlled the upstairs. So Mr. Entity actually became a captor. He controlled us, and he controlled us by threats, and he carried out the threats. You do this, if you don't do this, this will happen. And it did. He focused all his negative energy on my mother-in-law. He absolutely, it was like he hated my mother-in-law. He took her, she wasn't allowed wallet. If she had a wallet, he would destroy everything in the wallet. He destroyed her license, her credit card, money, anything. Her clothes. She'd wake up in the morning, go in her closet to try to get dressed, and he had cut her clothes to pieces. He would take shoes. He would take one of each shoe, so she only had one shoe, so she didn't have shoes. He was trying to just wear her down, and then he became he started to physically attack her. She would run through. Actually, I remember one time we were in the bedroom and she came running down the hall screaming and ran through the door, and she had seen what she thought was something chasing her, a black head. It's funny because it was always like a head. Then the next time we were in all together watching television, she went in the pantry. There's a pantry off the kitchen to get some paper towels or something, and we didn't even notice that she had got up to leave. And then we heard a scream, and I remember jumping up and running to get to her, and we found her in the pantry, and she was like coming out on the floor, like coming back to consciousness, holding her throat. And she explained that it locked her in the pantry and turned the light off. She couldn't turn the light on, and then it grabbed her by the throat, and there were actually marks on her throat.
Oh man!
At that point, I have to understand. I love my mother-in-law,
of course,
and I don't want anything to happen to her. And it gets to the point where the entity had controlled us for so long. It had been about a year, that he did horrible things, like he killed our dogs if we didn't do what he said. He just did horrible things. And I went into the bathroom after he hurt my mother-in-law, and I said, "This is it. Maybe I was stupid, but I just had enough." And I said, "I'm going to treat you with respect. You're going to treat me with respect. You're not going to hurt my husband. You're not going to hurt my child, and you're not going to hurt my mother-in-law. You're not going to hurt Lee." Now, I didn't mention my father-in-law because my father-in-law was rather indifferent to everything that was going on.
Well, that's what I kind of wanted to get into that, because you find a connection between your father-in-law and the spirit and your mother-in-law that goes back to past lives?
Yes. And when I told Mr. Entity this, I left the room to see what was going to happen. I came back in, and he wrote on the mirror, "I will not touch your child. I will not touch your husband, but Lee belongs to me." So at this point, this is when I started calling him Mr. Entity, because at that point I had never called him anything. And I told him I would show him respect, so I said, "I'm going to call you Mr. Entity." I never yelled at Mr. Entity. I never called him names. I just communicated with him. I said, "Why? Why is Lee yours?" This is when Mr. Entity explained to me why he was here. And he didn't do it in the book. It says it was a dream. It wasn't. Mr. Entity only communicated with me on the mirror. And he wrote the whole story out, wrote it. It was like communicating with someone, talking to someone, but he would write it. He told me that he had been in a monastery, I think it was back in the 1600s. And when he said he was in the monastery, I didn't get the impression that he meant he was in physical form. Okay. I had the feeling that he meant he was like he was now, but he was possessing a monastery. And he said there were monks in the monastery that practiced Satanism. And they had promised him a sacrifice. They had promised him Lee, who was a nun, a sacrifice. She was supposed to be sacrificed. For some reason, the sacrifice didn't come about, and she wasn't sacrificed. But he said it didn't matter that she wasn't sacrificed then, that she belonged to him because she was promised to him. So he had come to claim her in this life. So he wanted her dead.
And at the same time that all this is happening, the relationship between your father-in-law and your mother-in-law is deteriorating at the same time, right?
It was, because it was like my father-in-law, he was experiencing all the same things we were. He was a very strong man, but he wasn't frightened of anything really. And it was like almost he didn't care. I mean, he would see this entity tormenting my mother-in-law, and he tormented her night and day. It got to the point where he would put knives. The entity would put knives, like she'd go to sit down in a chair, and there'd be a knife in the chair. If she sat down, she'd get stabbed. Oh. Or when she'd go to bed at night, he'd have knives in her pillows so that she would get stabbed. It got to the point where we had to go with her, and we'd have to check before she sat down, before she went to bed. We had to always make sure everything was safe before she could move. But my father-in-law didn't give her any kind of sympathy. It was not like, oh, everything will be okay. It was like he just watched, and their relationship deteriorated. Now, my mother-in-law believed no matter what happened, you stayed with your husband. She was a good Italian wife.
Okay.
She always protected him no matter what happened. I could see this. My husband could see that he wasn't giving her any type of sympathy or strength or anything. So we could see it, but she tried to ignore it.
Well, also in the book, you talk about that, your father-in-law was worried about being cut off financially.
Right. My mother and my mother-in-law, they weren't wealthy, but they were financially secure, and he was obsessed with money. So that's all he would think. When we had people come to the house to try to get rid of the entity, he never thought, are these people going to help us? All he cared about was how much money it was going to cost us. Because the entity wasn't bothering him, other than destroying the house, it was focused on my mother-in-law.
And how much money do you think you spent on paranormal investigators and trips and, subsidizing people's, coming over?
You know what? I wasn't in charge of the money. My mother and father-in-law were. They paid for everything. So I really don't know, but it was in the thousands.
And so, they went in, they paid for trips for people to come to the house and investigate it.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we did. Yeah. And we had all kinds of people come. We had local people come. We had people just from around the state come. And some of the people that came were nice people. They tried to help. But the entity loved people coming to the house to try to get rid of him. It was like a game to him. I remember when Chris Chacon came, he said some very insulting things about Lloyd Arbeck. And then when Chris came, Chris brought one of those meters, you go mm-hmm. around that they use. And I remember when he left, Mr. Entity wrote on there, "You're fools. The machine didn't detect me." So he loved to insult people, and he just, it's like he enjoyed them coming trying to get rid of him because he knew they couldn't.
What was the relationship between your father-in-law, the entity, and your mother-in-law? So the entity was promised your mother-in-law's as a sacrifice centuries ago.
Right. Supposedly, what Mr. Entity told me was my father-in-law, who he even gave different names to these people. At the time when it was in the monastery, my father-in-law's name was Andre. He said Andre, because he used to refer to my father-in-law as Andre, because that's who he was in that past life. He was one of the monks, and he was the one that backed out of the agreement, and when he was captured, he told everybody else that was involved so he wouldn't get in trouble. So he was like a traitor. Mr. Entity used to refer to him as a traitor.
So the relationship's deteriorating, and your father-in-law is treating your mother-in-law, is treating Lee worse and worse all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually, your father-in-law, eventually there's the divorce. How long after that they start talking about divorce? How long after you guys had moved in, or after these things had started happening?
Years. It was like when we moved in, and I think we moved in the end of 87 or the beginning of 88 to the new house. And they didn't get divorced until I think it was the beginning of 92 or the end of 91.
Do you think that she was happier then after he left?
No. She was completely obsessed with my father-in-law. He could do no wrong. See, that was one of the problems. One thing that happened was the spear. You remember reading about the spear?
Oh,
in the
yeah.
book? Yeah. We had one lady that came to the house, Evelyn Paglini, who was, if you saw Dr. Evelyn Paglini, she was awesome. I thought when she came, this lady's going to be able to get rid of it. She practiced magic. The entity hated Dr. Paglini. He would say the worst things on the mirror about her. Finally, Dr. Paglini explained to us that she couldn't get rid of what was in the house because one of us in the house was giving it permission to stay. And she said, if something gives it permission to stay in your house, no one can get rid of it. She said, that's why it can stay here. I remember her telling me, she said, I'm going to do a ritual. Tonight I'm going to find out which one is keeping the entity in the house. Well, she said, I'll call you tomorrow. You let me know what happens.
Okay.
Well, we were all living in the bedroom at night. 3:00 in the morning, my father-in-law starts choking. He sits up in bed and starts choking and shaking. He was freezing and coughing. It's like he couldn't get his breath. We thought we were going to have to call an ambulance for him. That's how bad it got. It lasted like 15 minutes. Then he just laid down and went right back to sleep like nothing had happened. The next day, she said, tell me what happened. I told her what happened. She said, your father-in-law is the one who's keeping the entity in the house. He's giving him permission. And that's how we knew that he was keeping it in the house. Also, Mr. Entity, now, it got to the point where Mr. Entity and I would communicate constantly. It was morning till night. And the reason why, if I communicated with Mr. Entity and kept him talking, he didn't destroy as much. It was like he used his energy to talk to me instead of destroying the house. So I would talk to him constantly. I would go back and forth, and if I didn't keep the mirror erased so he had place to talk, he would write on walls. So I had to constantly go in the bathroom, talk to him, erase the mirror so he could keep communicating. So that's...
And you would leave the room every time you erased the mirror, and then when you came back...
Yeah, he never wrote in front of me, never. But it would be within seconds. I could leave the door, I could walk out the door, count to 5, come back in, and the mirror would be full of writing.
Okay. It's interesting. Reading the story, I think about, people in my own family that have had, been inside abusive relationships, and that wouldn't be, that they wouldn't leave the person that was abusive to them. And it almost sounds like this could be a way to cure your mother-in-law of an abusive relationship that she wouldn't otherwise get out of. This whole setup thing, she wouldn't get divorced, and this guy was making her miserable.
Right. Yeah, it was a hard way to do it. But then, with Dr. Paglini, she told us, I can't get rid of it. Well, a week after that, my father-in-law wakes up in the middle of the night with a yelp. And I remember jumping out of bed and running over to the bed. And he takes out from under his blanket a spearhead. And this spearhead's it's like 2 feet long, 18 inches long, I think it is. It was made of metal. You could see it was hand forged. It was an amazing piece of work. And I remember going in and saying to the entity in the mirror, what is this? And he said it was a spearhead. He wanted my father-in-law to perform a blood ritual on my mother-in-law. Now, the strange thing with Mr. Entity was, it was like he couldn't kill my mother-in-law. It's like he had the power. This entity he used to pick up the truck and put it in the middle of the street. We'd wake up the next day, we'd park the car in the driveway. We'd wake up the next day, it was in the middle of the road. So he could do amazing things. He said the spear is to be used for a blood ritual on Lee. And I remember telling him, no. I told Mr. Entity, no, you're not going to touch my mother-in-law. You're not going to use the spear. And he got so upset that he blew out all the windows on the top floor of the house.
So, like, broke the windows.
They were blown out. You could see where they were. It was like an explosion blown out.
That sounds terrifying.
That's how upset he got when I told him there wasn't going to be a blood ritual. And I remember I took the spear from my father-in-law, and I took it because for some reason the entity would never touch anything that belonged to me. And if I was near my mother-in-law, he couldn't hurt my mother-in-law. I don't understand why, but it was just the way it was.
Well, this is a good place probably to tell people where they can pick up the book and where they can learn more about a deadly haunting, see, how it got resolved, get more details on the crazy things that happened to the Moffitt family in the 1980s. Where can people pick up A Deadly Haunting?
On Amazon. It's on Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon, Book Baby, all the internet places where you can download it. You can get a physical copy on Amazon also. Also, if you can go to adeadlyhaunting.com on the internet, you can see pictures of the spear and of the entity writing. I have hundreds of back at that time, the people that would come would say to us, "Now document everything that's happening." So I would take pictures every time it wrote. I would take pictures, but then the next people would come and say, "Now you got to get rid of everything because if you have pictures of these things, you're going to keep it here." So when the entity finally left, we disposed of everything supposedly. I kept the spear because I didn't want the spear to go anywhere. I didn't want Mr. Entity to use it on anybody else. So I kept the spear because I knew if I had it, he couldn't touch it. My husband, who had kept all the pictures, told me that he got rid of all the pictures, but he didn't. He kept like 300 pictures, and he kept them in a box in the closet. I didn't even know he had them until he passed away, and I was cleaning.
And those are the ones that you show in the book and on the website.
Right. I have like 300 pictures of the entity writing and the different things he did. If we had kept them all, we would have had thousands of pictures because it wasn't like once a month or once a week. It was from the time we woke up in the morning until we went to bed, and then even during the time when we were sleeping, he did things. It was constant. It never stopped for 6 years.
Well, and for people who want to find out more, make sure you check out adeadlyhaunting.com and take a read of Deborah's story because it certainly is an interesting one. And Deborah, thank you for sharing your story with everybody because it is a fascinating and terrifying tale. So I'm just glad that everybody made it out safe on the other side. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you for calling me, Mike.
Great. Well, good luck to you. And then we're going to put a link to everything in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a great weekend, Debbie. We'll talk to you again.
You too. Bye-bye, Mike.
Bye.
Okay, come back
Hey,
in.
I'm back. I watched Moon.
Yeah, what'd you think?
It was amazing. You're right.
It's pretty amazing.
Thanks for the suggestion. I ate a whole tub of popcorn too while I was watching
Excellent. Anyway, so that was a really interesting interview with Deborah Moffitt.
Oh, I'll say.
Yeah, sweet
Wow.
woman. I mean, some crazy things
Just
happened to her.
Unbelievable.
And we have links to her book, A Deadly Haunting, in the show notes. Anyway, we've met a whole bunch of new people on Twitter over the past couple of weeks. And we just wanted to let you know that the feedback that we've been getting on Twitter is amazing.
Thank you so much. Seriously, the people who've said hi or, mentioned that they're listening to an episode, all that, it means a lot to us.
It does mean a lot. But what would mean even more is if you guys would go into iTunes and leave a review there. We do this because we love the topics. We love writing songs about it. We love,
it's
discussing
fun.
paranormal. It is fun discussing paranormal stuff. But the reviews in iTunes help a lot of other people in introducing them to the podcast.
Yeah.
So just check out the iTunes link, leave a review. I mean, if you think it's 5 stars, leave 5 stars. If you think it's not 5 stars, leave 5 stars. And
No, it would be great to see some because we had a pretty good roll going there in February, but then it's gotten quiet.
We haven't asked for it, so we're asking for it right now. So please leave a review. Okay,
Thank you.
That is our shameless plug.
Yes, okay.
And so we're gonna get to this next song.
Yes, song time.
This particular song, I thought of this the way that Deborah said that Mr. Entity kept them as a captor. And this was a demo we were working on kind of with that captor idea. And it's actually named after the first Dungeons and Dragons module. Modules were adventures that you could buy, and then you could be a dungeon master, and you'd read through the module and then do that. That would be an adventure, like a pre-made adventure instead of writing your own. And the first adventure that I ever DM'd or participated in was called The Keep on the Borderlands. And so that idea of being between, you were the only thing between the dark and the light. You were the thing protecting your home or protecting your place.
I see. That definitely.
You were the keep on the Borderlands.
Okay.
And here's a song.
Some days you are my prisoner. Some days you are my guard. Sometimes you are the one thing between me and the dark. And all the safe and reassuring words couldn't protect any of the hurt from self-loathing and boredom. So lock your doors, don't make eye contact, and maybe you'll get out intact. Humble, embarrassed and ignoble. So keep on, so keep on, keep on, keep on. Some days you are my prisoner. Some days you are my guard. Some days you are the one thing between me and the dark. And all the safe and reassuring words could protect any of the hurt from self-loathing and boredom. So lock your doors, don't make eye contact, and maybe you'll get out intact. Humble, embarrassed and ignoble. So keep on, so keep on, keep on, keep on. So keep on, so keep on, keep on, keep on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
That sounds terrifying.